In the tough, dry desert of Arizona in 1885, there wasn't much water or kindness to go around. Most people were mean and selfish. But this story starts with a baby crying so loud, you could hear it across the empty desert. This is a story about a man running away from his problems, a tiny baby who made his heart feel whole again, and a nice woman who helped change both their lives. Jace Sullivan was 32 years old and had done many jobs. He was a soldier, a gunfighter, and sometimes he made really bad choices. But as he rode his horse into a small town called Desert Ridge, holding baby Samuel close to his chest, he was just a scared man who didn't know how to take care of a baby. The baby was crying and crying, and the sound made Jace feel terrible. Wife had died when Samuel was born, and her last words kept playing in his head over and over. Promise me you'll keep him safe. Now it had been 3 days since the baby had proper milk, and Samuel was getting weaker and weaker. Jace was really scared that loving the baby might not be enough to save him. Desert Ridge looked like a bunch of old broken buildings, sitting in a valley. The sun had made everything look white and cracked. This was where desperate people came to live, where water cost more money than whiskey, and where nobody trusted anybody else. Nobody expected anything good to happen here. But sometimes good things come from the most surprising places. And sometimes one small act of kindness can change someone's whole life. The baby's crying had become like Jace's heartbeat. It never stopped, and it made him feel desperate and sad. 3 days of riding through the hot, mean desert had made both the man and the baby very tired and weak. Jace's horse, Thunder, carefully walked down the rocky hill toward Desert Ridge. The horse could smell water somewhere down there. Desert Ridge looked like God had started building it, but then forgot about it and left it half done. The buildings were leaning on each other, like they were too tired to stand up by themselves. Their walls were cracked and beaten up by sandstorms. The main street was just hard dirt, mixed with horse poop and broken dreams. But it was a real town, and real towns had milk. And milk meant Samuel might live to see another day. Jace got off his horse in front of the general store. His legs were shaky from riding for so long. Samuel moved a little against his chest and made a tiny cry that was so weak it barely made any sound. The baby's lips were dry, and his little face was red with fever. Jace had tried giving him sugar, water, tiny drops of whiskey, and even his own spit. But nothing worked. Samuel needed real milk. The store owner was a fat man, with mean eyes and teeth that were brown from chewing tobacco. He looked up from his book when Jace came in. "We don't help your kind here," he said right away. "My kind." Jace's voice was rough from dust and being so tired. "Drifters, gunfighters, men who bring trouble." The man stared at the gun on Jace's hip. That gun had been used recently, and you could tell just by looking at it. Jace ignored what the man said. "I need milk, powdered, canned, anything. The baby is starving." "Don't have any," the man lied easily. "Try the saloon. Maybe one of the girls can help you." The Broken Wheel saloon smelled like old beer, dirty bodies, and sadness. A piano player was trying to play songs, but they sounded terrible. Women with makeup and dead-looking eyes served drinks to men who had given up on having a good life. Everyone stopped talking when Jace walked in. Samuel's weak crying made people stare and whisper. "Well, I'll be damned," called a voice from the bar. "That's some interesting thing you got there, stranger." Jace walked up to the bartender, a man with scars and arms as big as tree trunks. "I need milk for the baby. I can pay." The bartender laughed, and it sounded like rocks in a bucket. "Does this look like a place for babies? We serve whiskey, not baby formula." "Please," Jace said, and the word tasted terrible in his mouth. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days." "That's really sad," the bartender said, but he didn't sound like he cared at all. "But crying babies are bad for business. Take it outside before my customers get mad." Jace put $2 silver on the bar, the last of his money. "Anything, goat milk, cow milk, anything at all." A woman at the end of the bar spoke up. Her makeup couldn't hide how hard her life had been. "You might try the doc's daughter. She lives in the adobe house past the church. She's good with difficult cases." The bartender gave her a mean look. "Mind your own business, Maggie. Doc's been dead for 3 years now," she continued, ignoring him. "But his girl, Abigail, has healing hands. She helps people when they got nowhere else to go." Jace took back his coins and headed for the door. Behind him, people started talking in whispers again. He heard bits of what they said. "Looks like trouble. That baby isn't going to make it. I've seen his type before." The church was just 4 walls and a cross, with paint peeling off like dead skin. Past it sat a small adobe house with a garden that somehow stayed green even in the desert heat. Smoke was coming from the chimney, and from inside, Jace could hear someone humming a lullaby, the same song his own mother had sung to him many years ago. He got off his horse and walked to the door on shaky legs. Samuel had gone quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that comes before the end. Jace raised his hand to knock, then stopped. What if she said no to... What if this was just another dead end in a place full of them? The door opened before he could knock. Abigail Foster stood there like something from a dream. She looked like she was about 25, with reddish-brown hair pulled back and green eyes that seemed to see everything. Her dress was simple but clean, and her hands, small but strong hands, were already reaching for Samuel before she'd even looked at Jace. "How long since he's eaten?" she asked, her voice soft but worried. 3 days, Jace admitted. Maybe longer. His mother died when he was born back in Tucson. I've been trying to get him somewhere safe, but... Bring him inside, Abigail said, stepping back quickly. The inside of the house felt safe and peaceful. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, making the air smell like lavender and sage. Books lined the walls, medical books and journals, things Jace hadn't seen since he'd been in a real city. A fire was crackling in the fireplace, making everything feel warm and bright. Abigail had already sat down in a rocking chair near the fire. She was unbuttoning her blouse like she'd done this many times before. "Give him to me," she said simply. Jace hesitated. He'd held Samuel close for so many miles that letting go felt like tearing away part of himself. But the baby was dying, and this woman, this stranger, was his only hope. The moment Abigail held Samuel against her chest, everything changed. The baby latched on immediately, desperately. His tiny fist pressed against her skin. The sound that followed soft sucking, then a happy sigh hit Jace like a punch. He turned away, his throat tight with feelings he couldn't name. "What's his name?" Abigail asked softly. "Samuel. His mother named him before... ... Double quotes. Jace's voice broke a little. "Before she died. And yours, Jace Sullivan." Abigail nodded, focusing on the child in her arms. "I lost one too," she said quietly. "Fever took him when he was 6 months old. That was 2 years ago." Jace turned back to look at her. There was no self-pity in her voice, just the kind of acceptance that comes from surviving something terrible. "I'm sorry," he said. "People don't like to talk about it," she continued. "They say it's God's will. They say I should move on. But some things change you forever." She looked down at Samuel, who had fallen asleep at her chest. "Some losses make you feel completely empty, like you're nothing but echoes and emptiness." "Then why help us?" Jace asked. Abigail smiled, and it was the first real warmth Jace had seen since leaving Tucson. "Because maybe filling that emptiness with love for someone else's child is better than staying empty forever." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell over Desert Ridge. Samuel slept peacefully for the first time in days. Breathing steady and strong, Jace found himself watching Abigail more than the baby. The gentle way she rocked, the care in her touch, the motherly instincts that went beyond blood and family. "You can stay in the stable tonight," she said, eventually. "There's clean straw and blankets. Samuel needs to eat again in a few hours." Jace nodded, but didn't move to leave. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." Abigail looked at him steadily. "I know you've ridden 3 days through desert heat to save this baby's life. I know you spent your last money trying to feed him. I know you're scared and desperate and doing the best you can." She paused. "That's enough for me." Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and another answered, then another. Desert Ridge settled into uneasy sleep around them. But inside Abigail Foster's small house, 3 lost souls had found each other in the darkness. And for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, the future didn't look quite so scary. As Jace finally made his way to the stable, with Samuel's peaceful breathing filling the silence, he dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found a safe place in this forgotten corner of the territory. What he didn't know was that safe places, like everything else worth having, would have to be fought for. And Desert Ridge had dangers far worse than dying of thirst in the desert. Dawn came slowly to Desert Ridge, painting the adobe buildings in shades of pink and gold that almost made the town look pretty. Jace woke up to the sound of Samuel crying, not the desperate wails of a starving baby, but the healthy demands of a child who expected his needs to be met. The sound was the most beautiful thing he'd heard in days. He found Abigail in her kitchen, already making a simple breakfast of eggs and cornbread, while Samuel nursed happily in a makeshift cradle near the stove. She looked up as Jace came in. noticing the way he moved, careful and alert. Like a man who'd learned that being safe was always temporary. "Coffee's on the stove," she said, pointing to a black pot. "Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks," Jace said, pouring himself a cup and enjoying the bitter warmth. "How's Samuel?" "Strong and determined. He ate twice during the night and didn't even wake you up." Abigail smiled down at the baby. "He's going to be fine. Children are tougher than we think they are." Jace felt something tight in his chest loosen up a little. For 3 days, he'd lived with a constant fear that Samuel might die in his arms, that he'd failed to keep the promise he'd made to Clara on her deathbed. Now, watching the baby sleep peacefully with a full belly, he dared to believe they might both survive this. After breakfast, Abigail showed him around her small place. Behind the house was a well that never ran dry, a vegetable garden that grew well despite the harsh weather, and a small stable where Thunder could rest and get better from their dessert trip. Everything showed careful planning and hard work. This was a woman who'd built a life from nothing but determination and skill. "My father was the territorial doctor," she explained as they walked through the garden. "He taught me everything he knew before the sickness took him. Now I help people when I can, delivering babies, setting broken bones, treating fevers. Desert Ridge doesn't have much, but it has enough people who need healing, and they pay you for it." Jace asked. Abigail shrugged. "Sometimes with money, more often with goods or services. Mrs. Patterson brings eggs. Tom Bradley fixed my roof last winter. It's not much, but it's enough." As they talked, Jace found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months. Abigail had an easy manner that made him want to trust her, a way of listening that made him want to tell her things he'd never shared with anyone, but he held back, knowing that his past was too heavy a burden for her shoulders. That afternoon, while Abigail took care of Samuel, Jace rode into town for supplies. He needed bullets, food, and information about the trail ahead. But mostly, he needed to get a sense of Desert Ridge's people and whether they'd be trouble. The general store owner was more helpful when Jace had money to spend, though his suspicion never fully went away. "You planning on staying long?" he asked as he wrapped up salt pork and hardtack. "Just passing through," Jace replied. "Soon as the baby is strong enough for travel. Might want to move that along," the man said quietly. Words spreading about. A stranger with a baby. Some folks are curious about why a man would be traveling alone with an infant. Jace paid for his supplies without saying anything, but the warning stuck with him. In the saloon, conversation stopped when he entered, starting up again in whispers when he passed. Eyes followed his movements, noting the way he wore his gun, the scars on his hands, the tiredness that never left his face. The bartender from the night before nodded as he approached. "Heard you found what you were looking for. The baby's doing better, thanks. That's good. Real good." The bartender leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But you might want to know, there's been a writer asking questions. He came through yesterday, showed a wanted poster with your face on it." Jace's blood turned to ice. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that come with a $500 bounty attached. Said you killed a family outside Phoenix, burned their house with them inside." "That's a lie." The words came out harsher than Jace intended. "Maybe so, maybe not. But the law's the law, and $500 is more money than most folks in this town see in a year." The bartender straightened up. "Ryder said he'd be back with the federal marshal. Might want to consider moving on before that happens." Jace left the saloon, with his mind racing. He'd known this day would come, had been running from it for months. The Phoenix incident had been a setup, a trap laid by Kane Blackwood to destroy what was left of Jace's reputation. But proving that would take time he didn't have and resources he didn't have. He rode back to Abigail's house with his thoughts spinning like a dust devil. Samuel was healthy enough for travel now, and staying would only put Abigail in danger. But the thought of leaving, of taking Samuel back into the uncertain hell of the trail, made his stomach hurt with dread. Abigail was waiting for him on the porch, Samuel sleeping in her arms. One look at Jace's face told her everything she needed to know. "Trouble?" she asked quietly. "A bounty hunter's looking for me. Claims I'm wanted for murder." Jace got off his horse slowly, his movements heavy with sadness. "We need to leave tonight." "No." Abigail's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "You don't understand. They think I killed a family, burned down their house. If they find me here, you'll be considered a helper." "Are you guilty?" Jace met her eyes. "No, but that doesn't matter. The law sees what it wants to see, and $500 buys a lot of willful blindness." Abigail stood up, holding Samuel protectively. "Then we'll face it together." Abigail, you can't. This is my home. My father built this house with his own hands, and I won't be driven from it by lies and bounty money. She stepped closer, her green eyes fierce with determination. Besides, Samuel needs stability. He needs a place where he can grow strong and safe. Running will only make you look guilty. That night, as they sat by the fire discussing their options, Abigail told Jace about her own past. Her father had been a Union Army surgeon who'd come west after the war, looking for peace and purpose in healing rather than killing. He taught me that sometimes standing your ground was the only way to preserve what mattered most, she said, rocking Samuel gently. He used to say that running from the truth never solved anything. It just gave your enemies more time to make up evidence against you. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was also stubborn as a mule when he believed he was right. Abigail smiled. I get that from him. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending sand across the roof. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse made a nervous sound, and Jace's hand moved toward his gun. He'd spent too many nights listening for hoofbeats that might belong. 2 men coming to kill him. Get some rest, Abigail said, noticing his tension. Whatever comes tomorrow, we'll face it with clear heads and steady hands. But sleep didn't come easily for Jay Sullivan. He lay in the stable loft, listening to the night sounds of the desert, thinking about the woman who'd shown him more kindness in 2 days than he'd received in 2 years of running. Samuel was safe now, healthy and protected. That was what mattered. That was what Clara had made him promise. If staying meant facing Kane Blackwood's lies in a courtroom, so be it. If it meant drawing his gun against bounty hunters, he'd do that too. But he wouldn't run anymore. Not when he'd finally found something worth fighting for. In the house, Abigail Foster sat by the dying fire, holding a baby who wasn't hers by blood, but was becoming hers by choice. She thought about the scarred, dangerous man sleeping in her stable, about the way he looked at Samuel with such desperate love, about the gentleness in his hands when he held the child. Tomorrow would bring trouble. She could feel it in the desert wind. But tonight, for the first time since her own baby had died, Abigail felt like she had a family worth protecting, and she'd learned from her father that some things were worth any price to defend. Outside, stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, caring nothing for human struggles. But somehow they seemed to bless this small corner of the territory, where mercy had found a foothold and love was taking root in the most unlikely soil. The trouble arrived 3 days later in the form of Deputy Marshal Frank Devlin, a thin man with cold eyes and a badge that gleamed like fresh silver. He rode into Desert Ridge with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his own righteousness, accompanied by a local bounty hunter named Pete Grimm, whose reputation was as ugly as his scarred face. Jace watched them from Abigail's kitchen window, his coffee growing cold in his hands. Samuel played on a blanket near the stove, babbling happily while reaching for wooden blocks Abigail had carved for him. The peaceful scene felt strange against the backdrop of approaching danger. That's them, Jace said quietly. Abigail moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. The marshal looks honest enough. Honest men can still be wrong. And bounty hunters like Grimm don't care about truth, only profit. They watched as the 2 men got off their horses in front of the sheriff's office. Even from a distance, it was clear they were asking questions, showing papers, building a case. Within an hour, every person in Desert Ridge would know why they were there. I should go to them, Jace said. Turn myself in before they come looking. Absolutely not. Abigail's tone left no room for argument. We agreed to face this together, and that's what we're going to do. Abigail, if they find me here, they'll find a man caring for his child in the home of a respected member of this community. Sometimes appearances matter more than accusations. Jace looked down at her, struck once again by her quiet strength. In the 3 days since the marshal's approach had been announced, Abigail had transformed from a woman offering temporary shelter into something he'd never expected to find again, a partner. She'd stood with him through Samuel's feverish night, helped him practice his testimony, even cleaned and oiled his weapons while discussing legal strategy. You don't have to do this, he said. Samuel and I could disappear tonight, head for Mexico, and spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders. That's no way to raise a child. Abigail picked up Samuel, who gurgled happily at the attention. Besides, I've grown rather fond of you both. I'm not ready to say goodbye. The admission hung between them like morning mist, delicate and precious. Over the past week, something had grown between Jace and Abigail that went beyond gratitude or convenience. It was in the way she handed him coffee in the morning, how he unconsciously moved to stand between her and potential danger, The comfortable silences they shared while watching Samuel sleep. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Jace's hand moved to his gun, but Abigail touched his wrist gently. "Let me," she said. Deputy Marshal Devlin stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, looking more like a man paying a social call than a lawman making an arrest. Behind him, Pete Grimm leaned against the porch rail, his hand resting casually on his gun. "Miss Foster," Devlin said politely. "I'm Deputy Marshal Frank Devlin. I was hoping I could have a word." "Of course, Marshal. Please come in." Devlin entered, but Grimm stayed outside. A strategic positioning that wasn't lost on Jace. The Marshal's eyes swept the room, taking in the peaceful details. Baby clothes hanging by the fire, toys scattered on the floor. The unmistakable signs of a family home. "I understand you've been providing assistance to a man named Jace Sullivan," Devlin said carefully. "Mr. Sullivan and his son have been staying here." "Yes. The baby was quite ill when they arrived." "His son?" Devlin's eyebrows rose slightly. "Little Samuel." Abigail adjusted the baby in her arms with natural motherly grace. "He's recovered wonderfully, haven't you, sweetheart?" Jace stepped forward, hands visible and non-threatening. "Marshal, I'm Jace Sullivan. I believe you're looking for me." Devlin studied him carefully. The man standing before him looked nothing like the wild-eyed desperado described in the wanted posters. Jace was clean-shaven, his clothes neat, his manner respectful. Most telling of all was the way he looked at the baby, with the fierce protective love of a devoted father. "Mr. Sullivan, I have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the deaths of the Morrison family outside Phoenix. You're accused of arson and multiple counts of murder." "I didn't do it," Jace said simply. "I was there, but I tried to save them, not kill them. That's for a court to decide. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to come with me." "No." Abigail's voice was steady but firm. "Samuel needs his father. Surely you can see that Mr. Sullivan poses no flight risk. He's been here for a week. Could have run at any time." Devlin hesitated. The scene before him didn't match his expectations. He'd been told to expect a dangerous criminal, possibly holding hostages. Instead, he found what appeared to be a small family, living quietly in a respectable home. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but—" "Marshal," Abigail interrupted, "before you make any decisions, there are some things you should know about the Morrison case." She walked to her father's desk and got a bundle of letters. "I've been writing back and forth with a colleague in Phoenix, Dr. Margaret Winters. She treated some of the survivors and has information that might be relevant to your investigation." Devlin accepted the letters with obvious doubt, but as he read, his expression grew troubled. Dr. Winters' account painted a very different picture than the official report. According to her testimony, Jace Sullivan had pulled to Morrison children from the burning house, getting burns on his own hands in the process. He'd been trying to save the family, not destroy it. "This is all very interesting," Devlin said finally, "but it doesn't change the fact that there's a warrant." "Marshal," the voice came from the doorway, where Sheriff Tom Bradley stood with his hat in his hands. "Might I have a word?" Bradley was a local man, elected more for his fairness than his gun skills. He'd known Abigail since she was a child and respected her judgment completely. "Sheriff, this is federal business." "I understand that, Marshal, but Miss Foster here has been treating folks in this territory for years. Saved my own wife during a difficult birth last spring. If she says a man's innocent, that carries weight with me." "It's not about innocence or guilt," Devlin said, though his conviction was wavering. "It's about following proper procedure." "Then follow it," Abigail said, "but do it here. Mr. Sullivan isn't going anywhere, and Samuel needs stability. Surely you can conduct your investigation without separating a father from his infant son." The room fell silent, except for Samuel's soft babbling and the tick of the mantel clock. Outside, Pete Grimm shifted impatiently, his spurs jangling against the porch boards. "Where's the fire in this?" Grimm called through the open door. "We got our man. Let's take him in and collect our money." Devlin shot him a sharp look. "You'll speak when spoken to." Grimm, the bounty hunter's face darkened, but he said nothing more. Jace noticed the exchange and filed it away. Tension between a federal marshal and his hired help might be useful information. "I'll need to send some telegrams," Devlin said finally. "Verify some of these details with Phoenix." "Sheriff, can Mr. Sullivan be housed in your jail temporarily?" "Don't have a jail," Bradley replied. "Just a couple of cells in the back of my office, and they ain't fit for a man with a baby. He can stay here," Abigail said. "Under house arrest if necessary. I'll vouch for his character." Devlin looked around the room once more, taking in the evidence of genuine family life. Whatever Jace Sullivan might have done in his past, He clearly wasn't the same man now. The change in him was clear, the way he held himself, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to the baby, the obvious care he took not to alarm anyone. "Very well," the marshal said. "Mr. Sullivan, you're confined to this property pending further investigation. Any attempt to leave will result in immediate arrest. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir. And Miss Foster, you're vouching for this man's character. I hope you understand the responsibility that entails." Abigail lifted her chin proudly. "I do, Marshal." Completely. After Devlin left, Jace sank into a chair by the fire, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just happened. Abigail had risked her reputation, possibly her freedom, to stand with him. She'd face down a federal marshal with nothing but conviction and courage. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why would you do that for me?" Abigail sat beside him, still holding Samuel. "Because I believe in you. Because this baby needs his father. And because—" She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "Because I've come to care about what happens to both of you." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Jace reached out to touch her hand, marveling at the softness of her skin, the strength in her fingers. "Abigail, I don't say anything you might regret," she said softly. "Just promise me you'll fight. Promise me you won't give up on yourself, or on Samuel, or on the possibility that good things can still happen to good people." Jace looked into her green eyes and saw something he'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Not the desperate hope of a drowning man, but the steady, enduring hope of someone who believed the future could be better than the past. "I promise," he said. Outside. The sun set over Desert Ridge in a blaze of orange and purple, painting the adobe buildings in warm light. In Abigail Foster's small house, three people who'd found each other, against all odds, settled in for another night, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but facing them together. For the first time since Clara's death, Jace Sullivan dared to believe that he might not have to face the future alone. The telegram from Dr. Winters arrived 5 days later, delivered by a nervous boy who'd ridden hard from the territorial capital. Marshal Devlin read it twice before walking to Abigail's house. His expression unreadable, but his step lighter than it had been in days. Jace was in the garden with Samuel, showing the baby how tomatoes grew, while Abigail gathered herbs for her medical practice. The peaceful scene struck Devlin powerfully. This was not a dangerous criminal hiding from justice, but a man building a life with quiet determination. "Mr. Sullivan," Devlin called. "I need to speak with you." They gathered in Abigail's sitting room, Samuel playing happily on his blanket, while the adults discussed his father's fate. Devlin spread several documents on the table, including the telegram, witness statements, and revised crime scene reports. "Dr. Winters has been very thorough," the marshal began. "She's interviewed 3 additional witnesses who placed you at the scene trying to rescue the Morrison family, not harm them. She's also uncovered some interesting information about who might have actually started that fire." Jace leaned forward, hardly daring to hope. "What kind of information?" "It seems a man named Kane Blackwood was seen in the area that night. He had a grudge against John Morrison over a land dispute, and several witnesses now remember seeing him leaving the scene just before the fire started." Abigail reached for Jace's hand, squeezing gently. "Kane Blackwood," she said. "I've heard that name before. Hasn't he been trouble for years?" "More than trouble," Devlin replied grimly. "He's wanted in 3 territories for various crimes, but he's been clever about staying ahead of the law. This might be the evidence we need to finally bring him in." "So I'm cleared?" Jace asked, afraid to believe it. "The charges against you are being dropped. Dr. Winters' investigation shows clear evidence that you were trying to save lives, not take them. There will be a formal hearing in Phoenix to make it official, but for all practical purposes, you're a free man." The relief that washed over Jace was so intense it left him lightheaded. For months, he'd been running, looking over his shoulder, wondering if every sunset might be his last as a free man. Now, suddenly, the future stretched ahead with possibilities he'd hardly dared imagine. "There's more," Devlin continued. "The territorial governor is offering a reward for information leading to Kane Blackwood's capture. Your testimony about his involvement in the Morrison case could be quite valuable." "I'll testify," Jace said, without hesitation. "Whatever it takes to see him brought to justice." But their celebration was cut short by the sound of approaching horses. Through the window, they could see Pete Grimm riding toward the house with 3 other men, all armed and looking determined. "That's not good," Devlin muttered, reaching for his gun. "Grimm's not going to be happy about losing his bounty money." Jace was already moving, scooping Samuel into his arms while motioning for Abigail to get behind the heavy wooden table. How many bullets in that rifle of yours? He asked. Enough, she replied grimly, checking the load with practiced efficiency. Grim's voice boomed across the yard. Sullivan, come on out. Federal Marshal says you're innocent, but I got a different opinion. Devlin stepped onto the porch, badge prominently displayed. Grim, you're out of line here. The charges have been dropped. Maybe so, but I got expenses to recoup, and I don't much like being made a fool of. Grim spat into the dust. Sullivan comes out now, or we come in and get him. You'll do no such thing, Devlin replied, his hand resting on his weapon. You've got no authority here, and I'm ordering you to stand down. Grim's laugh was ugly. You're one man, Marshal, account 4 of us. Arithmetic ain't complicated. Inside the house, Jace was weighing their options. The walls were thick adobe that would stop most bullets, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Worse, Samuel's presence limited their ability to fight back effectively. There's a root cellar under the kitchen, Abigail whispered. It's well hidden and solid stone. Samuel would be safe there. Jace nodded, carrying the baby to the concealed entrance. Samuel seemed to sense the tension, his dark eyes wide and serious, as his father settled him into the underground space with blankets and toys. Stay quiet, little man, Jace murmured, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. Papa will be right back. When he returned to the main room, Abigail had positioned herself at a window with her rifle, while Devlin covered the front door. Marshall's face was grim but determined. I've sent for Sheriff Bradley, Devlin said, but it'll be 20 minutes before he gets here with help.